Welcome back. This is our lecture summary voiceover for themes of art, looking at the relationship between art and our everyday lives. So the main purpose of this next lecture is to kind of think about what topics or subjects artists tend to investigate in their work, the types of things that we've seen across the whole development of human culture. Obviously, human beings are going to make art that's very much about their experience of the world, and so this theme of art and the daily life, art and the life of everyday people, becomes a pretty important subject for us. We've got a couple vocab terms to look at. We want to pay attention to the term utilitarian and aesthetic, and definitely as you're thinking about your themes, you're going to see a lot of sub-themes under these big headings, but we'll look at really four major ones: the natural world, daily life, imagination, and then kind of key life events like birth and death. So the first vocab term to deal with is the idea of utilitarian versus aesthetic. So these are examples of objects that are nice to look at. They're not overly decorative, they're certainly not ugly, but this would be considered kind of daily use china that was produced in England starting around 1750s by the Wedgwood Company. And Wedgwood was one of the first companies to really develop what we today would call price points, things that were of lower cost, cheaper to manufacture, cheaper to buy, that were for daily use, and then things that were more expensive, that were more decorative, things that would be used only for special occasions. So things that are really made with their primary goal being functionality and use, we can call utilitarian, whereas objects that might be functional but really are clearly not intended for daily use, really more to be appreciated just purely for their appearance, even though these things could be used for a practical function, for the most part, the people who collect these would not really be using them to pour coffee or juice or something. These are things that would be put on shelves to be admired as art objects, and so therefore they fall under the category of being purely aesthetic. We can definitely look at how art is a function of need among human beings as the cultures of humanity have evolved over the course of time. We can see that almost every culture has felt the need to decorate things, to create aesthetic objects to look at. These are objects that don't really have a practical daily use function. A painting, after all, is very different from a plate or a cup. It's not something that you can eat off of. It doesn't fulfill that type of daily need of food, shelter, clothing, etc. But aesthetic objects, art objects, tend to fulfill kind of higher needs, societal needs, emotional and psychological needs. And one of the things that seems prevalent to me throughout human history is the need to kind of respond to the world around us, this theme of nature. We saw it definitely with the very first early example I showed you last time of the cave paintings of horses and bulls and other animals. People have made images about the world around them really since the dawn of time. I just wanted to share some themes here of natural world as an artist's theme to show you how different people have approached this in different ways over time. This is the work of Claude Monet. Monet is the leader of the Impressionists, and he's painting haystacks, which, if we think about it, hay tends to be kind of a khaki-colored, beige, yellowish, brownish, kind of earth-colored material. It certainly doesn't have orange, red, pink, and blue in it the way this painting seems to, but what he's painting is not the abject reality of the objects. What he's painting is the effect of light and shadow on those objects. The Impressionists were really interested in literally capturing an impression of what they were looking at. So you notice that the painting's very fuzzy in terms of detail. You can really clearly see the brush marks, and you see a lot of reflected color. Some of the greens from the ground are reflected into the haystack. Some of the colors in the shadow are reflected back into the ground. And you see throughout history Monet's work, it's kind of fascinating to think that these are painted right around the same time and in a very similar location. These are more haystacks, which have a very different color cast to them because they're capturing a different time of day. Monet was really sensitive to trying to make the impression of the quality of light and the colors that it imparted as the light changed over the course of time, over the course of a single day, or even from day to day over different seasons. He does the same thing with his Water Lilies series. When we think of painting water, we think of water as being blue, but look at the difference in the blue in this first painting versus this second one. There's only a handful of years in between them, and they're obviously painted from pretty much the same source, almost the same point of view, and you can see that at different times of day, different times of year, different colors are reflected into those surfaces. We certainly can create an emotional response in the viewer through use of highlights, shadows, value, and color. This landscape gives me a very different, somber, sad emotion in comparison to the joyful colors that we saw in the paintings by Monet. This is the work of Caspar David Friedrich. It's kind of fascinating to think that human beings are this sensitive to our environment, that just an image of remnants of a building and some leafless, possibly dead trees gives us such a deeper sense of sadness, isolation, compared to the feelings that were evoked by the work of Monet. This is another Friedrich painting that really captures some drama, but also drama of the past. If you look carefully, you can see there's a shipwreck that's happened in amongst this ice flow. There's the remnants of the ship in the background. So even though everything is still, this image is kind of captured frozen, shattered movement. It's very believable, very emotional, very cold. This is definitely a more positive emotion, or a happier, brighter emotion. And the artists of this style, Frederick Edwin Church, is usually associated with the Romantic style of painting in the early 1800s. The Romanticists were not just about sweetness and light. They painted drama, sometimes extreme sadness. But the Romantic landscape is one in which we're meant to kind of feel this extreme sense of awe, what the Romantic philosophers and painters called the feeling of the sublime, the feeling when you face nature, when you're alone on the beach in front of a huge ocean full of waves, you feel suddenly very, very small in relationship to the entire planet, and you feel a little bit of that grandeur of your experience of life in this natural environment. And that's what they were trying to capture in the paintings. Certainly you feel that here with the Aurora Borealis. It's also fascinating to think that an artist could create an image of something that you personally might not ever get to see, and by making a painting of it, communicate to you what the experience of seeing that phenomenon or that location, that landscape, would be if you were there in person. It's a way of communicating across time. Certainly, Georgia O'Keeffe uses a combination of her observations of natural forms, particularly flowers, but often also skulls, and abstraction, although to a degree her abstraction's a little bit restrained. The images still retain a lot of information that clues you into what kinds of flowers you're seeing, what types of objects you're seeing. But she zeroes in on things that are relatively small and paints them on quite a large scale, that they take up the entire canvas and suffuse it with color and light and create a sense of real vibrancy and power. She really makes you stop and look at something that you might otherwise ignore, something small that would be easy to pass by. It fills the canvas like this, really reminds you of the beauty of the natural world around us, and I think that was one of her main goals. Certainly, when we look at the work of the realist painters, and this would be the style of realism with a capital R, it begins in France in the late 1840s into the 1850s with the work of Gustave Courbet, and here you see his painting, The Stonebreakers. During the time that Courbet was painting, the art world was really controlled by what was known as the Art Academy. The Academy was both a system for training artists, but it also was a system for judging the quality of art. Just like today we have the Oscars, the movie awards that are given by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the art academies of Europe of the 1700s and 1800s kind of controlled what types of art were considered good and what art was promoted to the general public. So the art that Courbet was making was really scandalous to the Academy. The Academy was accustomed to artists making large paintings, and this picture is very big in scale, with lots of figures, more than just a handful of people, and most often of biblical, religious subjects or historical subjects. Paintings of battle scenes, that type of thing, is what was considered the noble cause of a great artist. Nobody would make a painting of low-class peasants who are working here breaking rocks to make gravel to pave a road. This was not considered the kind of subject that a great painter would take on. But you can see that Courbet has painted this with such a high degree of accuracy, it almost looks photographically real. In fact, he called his style realism with a capital R for that reason. He very much wanted to paint only what he could really see. And one of the themes that he introduced into art that had not really been acceptable in Europe for several hundred years, this theme of everyday life, of everyday people, this theme of work. We certainly see that moving forward into the Impressionist era. This is the work of a painter in France named Caillebotte, and Caillebotte here is painting the men who are planing and staining this grand hardwood floor in a room that they will never be invited to attend parties or salons in this space. So you really get a sense of disconnect, right, between upper and lower class and the idea of the worker, the idea of what goes on behind the scenes of making something look beautiful for an upper class client. Certainly a theme for a lot of us in our daily lives is going to school. And this painting, in a way, is a little bit nostalgic. It evokes a feeling of a time gone by. I didn't go to a one-room schoolhouse, but I always feel nostalgic when I see this painting. It was made by an artist who actually was known for illustrations that he created during the American Civil War. Before cameras were sophisticated enough to capture things that were moving really, really quickly, artists had to go into the battlefield to record what was happening as quickly as they could in drawing form. Those drawings were then turned into prints and printed in newspapers and magazines. So Homer had seen a lot of the devastation of the Civil War, and after the Civil War made several paintings, some similar to this, which created sort of a feeling perhaps of hope for the youth of the next generation, healing the wounds of the war, moving forward and creating some more positive America. Definitely it's a little bit sweet, but at the same time it does create a sense for a lot of people that there is something important about the energy of what goes on in the playground and the schoolroom, the classroom. Certainly for everybody, food is an important part of your day-to-day life, and there are lots of paintings devoted to not only food products, but in this case to actual food preparation. This is the work of Spanish Baroque painter Velázquez. He did several paintings on this theme of people preparing food. Before we had formal restaurants, it was not unusual, especially in Spain, for people who were able to cook to open their kitchens almost as short order cooks to their neighbors who would come and pay a small fee to be able to eat a home-cooked meal. And here you see the old woman cooking eggs. In American painting, definitely there's a theme of domesticity and things of the home, and cooking in particular is a theme that comes up in the work of Lillian Spencer. It's a little easy, I think, in the 21st century to look at these as kind of quaint or a little bit cheesy, but I think it's fascinating to think of Lily Martin Spencer as being the main um, income earner in her household. In fact, she supported her entire family, including 7 children, through the production and sale of her artwork. So she definitely took what at the time may have been considered kind of a woman's role in home, to be the cook and the nurturer, and made a career out of it, made a financial success out of that. Her titles are kind of goofy. The one at the top of the woman kneading dough is called Shake Hands, question mark, because obviously her hands are covered in flour. You wouldn't want to touch her hands. But the woman at the right is actually giving us a little bit of a suggestive wink. She is cooking molasses, and so the title of her painting is Kiss Me and You'll Kiss the Lasses, implying that she's been tasting the molasses as she cooks it. I suppose for the 1800s that counts as a really saucy kind of joke. In the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist era, we have a whole different take on people's social lives might look like. And what you're seeing here is a painting by Toulouse-Lautrec. Lautrec was one of the most famous of the Post-Impressionist painters. He frequented this particular bar nightclub known as the Moulin Rouge, which means the red windmill. And in fact, it was decorated with an architectural element of a red windmill. You may know the Nicole Kidman, Ewan McGregor movie, Moulin Rouge. It's based on this time period and these people. And it in some ways does attempt to capture the kind of body and counterculture experience that you would have had going to this place. Obviously, it looks like kind of upper middle class, middle-aged white people in suits and dresses. They may look kind of stuffy to you, but you have to realize that what they're wearing are the most common clothes of the day. If these were contemporary people, they'd be wearing blue jeans. They would look like people you see every day in your personal life. What they're drinking, though, is absinthe. They're actually drinking an alcohol that has a hallucinogenic quality. In the background, you can see some of the performers. This is one of the comedians who performs at this nightclub, and you can certainly feel the kind of odd sensations that are happening with the lights of the nightclub itself. It starts to feel a little bit like you're having a hallucination as you sit here looking at this particular scene. So the theme of entertainment, nightlife, is something that we often see in visual art. Moving into the 1980s and 90s, Nan Goldin was a well-known American photographer, and she documented really an underground club scene. A lot of her friends were fellow artists, club kids, dancers, etc., many of whom died from HIV/AIDS. And so she definitely recorded some of the counterculture of her time in a way that's kind of similar to what Toulouse-Lautrec was doing in the post-impressionist era. Certainly one of the most American art forms of entertainment that I can think of is the movies, and this is a much more elegant way of going to the movies than what you may be accustomed to today. It used to be that an usher, or in this case usherette, would take your ticket, walk you to a seat, and here you see a woman who's literally at work while the rest of the people who are there have paid to see them. They're sitting enjoying the entertainment. She's kind of taking a break or resting in between her duties as an usher. Certainly in a lot of people's lives, sports is a major part of our entertainment and our leisure activities. You may even participate in a variety of sports yourself, and anything that human beings do or are engaged in or interested in is going to find its way into the art that human beings make. This is the work of a painter named George Bellows. He was a follower of a group of American painters known as the Eight. There were 8 of them, so that's an obvious kind of name. But they became known collectively as the Ashcan School because they painted kind of down and dirty, nitty-gritty daily life scenes. And Bellows got really well known for these paintings of prize fights. Ironically, during the time that he painted these, prize fighting was actually illegal in the state of New York, and so in order to hold these kind of boxing matches, the only way to do that was to hold them in private clubs, in gentlemen's clubs. So if you think about the club as a combination of your health club, your gym, a nightclub, bar, restaurant, a place to hang out and spend your leisure time that would require you to pay a membership fee, that's what you're seeing here. And you see the kind of energy and power that he's got into these figures, like they were painted almost while they were fighting. Bellows, though, is also known for his genre scenes, and genre is an important term for us to remember. Genre, we use this term very differently in visual art than we use it in other areas. For our purposes, genre means a scene of daily life. So Bellows is giving us a glimpse into big city life for people who don't have a ton of money, and this painting is really kind of a remarkable one, which shows what tenement housing looks like in lower income slums in large cities at the early part of the 20th century. You can kind of tell that it's summertime, it's really hot, you can see people standing around outside trying to cool off. You get a sense of how many people are jam-packed into these apartments. Another scene from city life is presented here as a piece by Romare Bearden. Bearden's actually a North Carolina artist. He was born in Charlotte and trained in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance in the 20th century. So Romare Bearden's work incorporates a lot of collage cut pasted paper as well as painting, and this particular section of this much larger painting shows you a funeral home. There are people carrying the casket out of the front door toward the hearse and see the soul being carried up by angels above. This piece, if you see the whole thing all together, is a really pretty remarkable painting. It was completed in 1971. It's 6 panels joined together. Each one is about 3 feet in length, so 18 feet total, nearly a 20-foot long painting. When he premiered the painting, he also had a recording playing in the gallery that had the sounds of street life. It had the sounds of cars honking and sirens going by, kids playing, like that hustle bustle sound of big city life. It's really kind of a remarkable way of incorporating multiple senses in showing this image of daily life. Now, we don't live in a big city. This might be more familiar to you. I've got a big magnolia tree in my front yard. I drive a beat-up old pickup truck. This feels a little more relatable to me than an image from New York or from a large city. So definitely images of genre are not limited only to one place. Genre would be daily life of anybody in any walk of life, any scenario. Another massive theme, though, about our actual lives is the theme of imagination. What happens when we dream? What do we see in our imaginations? What do we see in our subconscious? That's very much at the heart of surrealists were after. The surrealist style has the word realism in it, and of course one of the things that makes their work compelling is that they obey a lot of rules that make things look real. The direction of shadows, highlight and shadow, to create believable three-dimensional forms. The use of perspective, generally speaking, makes these things seem fairly real. But they were aiming at something that was above or beyond reality, surreality, above reality, that somehow would be a fusion or combination of the real objective world and the interior life of your imagination and your subconscious. So a lot of surrealist artists drew their imagery from direct imagination, from hallucinations, from other subconscious automatic kind of generation of subject matter. And that's what you're seeing here with the work of De Chirico. He grew up in an Italian city that had, of course, buildings that had been built centuries before he was born. So there's a lot of Renaissance architecture in his work, but there's often also a feeling of threat or a feeling of danger that you feel in these, especially with this mystery and melancholy of the street. You can see that his perspective is kind of nightmarish, that the angle of this building implies that the vanishing point should be here, and yet the angle of these doors on this building implies the vanishing point should be here. So it's definitely keeping you off center, keeping you off balance. And you see what looks like the silhouette of a young girl playing, but she's alone in this alleyway. Only other source of evidence of a human life is this shadow of someone coming toward her that seems to be cutting off her only exit. And you can see that she's near this wagon that has an opening in the back, as if she might be abducted, thrown in here, locked in, and then carried off. There's a sense of threat and nightmarish quality to these. Of course, not all surrealist imagery is nightmarish. In fact, this is all relatively fun. This is the work of René Magritte, and Magritte was one of the surrealists who really did not believe it was necessary to use any artificial stimulus to create subconscious imagery. He, in fact, didn't agree with using drugs or alcohol to induce subconscious thought. He claimed that his dreams were vivid enough that he needed no stimulus to achieve his imagery. So you can see quite often he creates visual games for us. A fireplace, of course, is meant to draw smoke away from fire, but it also sort of looks like a entrance or exit of a tunnel, which makes this image make sense. My personal favorite, though, is this one, the way that this horse somehow is overlapped by trees that should be behind it based on this sense of space here. He's even overlapped in some places by negative space between the trees. Pretty imaginative work there. Another piece by Magritte in which the background outside the doorway here to this beach seems to magically, seamlessly flow straight onto the canvas on his easel. Definitely we need to think about the idea of religion as a social construct, and we'll deal with that in the next lecture. But I wanted to use this particular example just to show you how an artist can use their imagination to help explain something that is really kind of a complicated visual idea. If you look at the actual text from the Bible about the creation of Adam, God puts the spark of life into the clay figure of Adam through the breath. It's really hard to draw breathing. I mean, air is, right? So what Michelangelo has done is created this sense that the spark of life is being passed from the creator to the creation by that touch of the fingers. It's really a remarkable way of reimagining this story, or this aspect of the creation myth. It's also amazing to me to think that there are so few images by Western artists of God the Father. We see lots of images of God as Christ, but not of the creator, not of the figure. This is a piece created by William Blake, who's not only a great illustrator and painter in his own right, but also a great romantic poet. He also did a series of images to illustrate his own poetry, images of the Red Dragon, which, if you are a Hannibal Lecter fan, you may recognize that image of the Red Dragon from the first of the Hannibal Lecter novels. Another aspect of illustrating ideas from a biblical source or from a religious source that involves the use of imagination is this image by Henry Ossawa Tanner. Tanner is the first internationally recognized, world-famous African-American painter. He was a massive success. And he definitely was an artist who was known for images about the African-American experience, but he also did a series of paintings of religious subjects, and this is one of them. This is a pretty typical scene in Christian art and Catholic art, especially in the Renaissance. There are hundreds of paintings of what we call the Annunciation, the moment the announcing angel appears to Mary to tell her that she's pregnant with the Christ child. And in most of them, you see an angel in a very typical way that we imagine them looking like a human being with wings. Tanner envisions an angel as a being of pure light. It's a truly unique, original way of imagining what that scene might have looked like. And it's so very different from the examples at the bottom of your screen there, which is sort of the typical traditional way of presenting this story. See how vital the use of imagination is for an artist in terms of helping us to relate and to think about different events in history. Certainly, our artwork over time has evolved to show our relationship to the human body and our understanding and our appreciation of that form. We talked a little bit about ancient art when we were looking at paintings of the horse on cave walls, but these are carvings of obviously the human female form, exaggerating the breasts and hips and emphasizing kind of the fertility, reproductive ability women have. And you can see a really odd connection between these objects, which are generally from about 30,000 years ago, related to the way that Willem de Kooning in the 1950s abstracted the human female in his abstract expressionist paintings. It's kind of interesting to think about how we relate to our depictions of ourselves, of human bodies, and how those things have changed over time and how they've stayed the same over time as well. Certainly, very few Western images are as direct as these images that you're seeing here. We often see the theme of women with children long after they've been born, but it's relatively rare to images of actual childbirth or images of breastfeeding. But that's not true in all cultures. So again, it's really important for us to think about how we're kind of conditioned to think about the body or to think about life based on the images that we're exposed to on a daily basis. Certain cultures, other cultures around the world might give you a different way of understanding or appreciating the experience of being human and what that means. We certainly can see both childbirth and the breastfeeding theme in the work of Frida Kahlo. Frida is a surrealist painter, although she never liked that particular title. She said that she didn't paint dreams, she painted her personal realities. So it's kind of fascinating to see her tackling similar themes that are almost forbidden in Western art in such a frank and direct manner. Other artists in Western tradition have taken on this subject as well. This is the work of Judy Chicago. She's very well known for her feminist themed artwork. We saw her dinner party in the previous lecture, but now in this case you're seeing her one of her tapestries from a series called The Birth Project, which is one of the few examples that we can look at in 20th century American art that directly deals with the concept of childbirth. It's more typical to see something like this, but obviously the themes of birth and death are central to our experience of life on this planet. So it's not just the idea of raising children. We want to express our relationship to these seminal moments, to the beginning of life and to the end of life. This is the work, of course, Mary Cassatt, one of the most famous of the French Impressionists, although she was American-born and maintained her American citizenship, although she lived and worked in France. She is one of the few women who were in this movement, one of the only, in fact, the only American in the core group of French Impressionists, so a massively successful American artist as well, and well known for her images that kind of emphasize the role of women and the importance of raising children in our culture. We definitely can see artists challenging what we might think of as common beauty standards as well. And we've had this type of work in American culture for quite a while. One of my favorite examples actually is the self-portrait on the right by Alice Neel. she doesn't look beautiful by the standards of Instagram models, right? But what she's doing is really taking an honest look at herself as an older body. She had children herself. You know, her body changed over time. She became famous later in her life. She was really in her senior years when she was making this particular image of herself. It's a very brave self-portrait. Certainly more contemporary work on the left by Jenny Saville, her paintings very much in the 90s especially, showed women's bodies that had more curve, more flesh, much more than we would expect to see based on what our popular culture is telling us are the standards of beauty of our contemporary culture. Her work really kind of pushes at that boundary of making you wonder why you think a certain thing is beautiful or a certain body type beautiful. They're very confrontational paintings. There are some interesting approaches, I think, from contemporary artists toward how we perceive one another. And this is the work of Nikki Lee, who is herself Korean and yet presents herself through changes in makeup and clothing, etc., as members of other minority groups. And then she kind of has herself photographed in amongst the people that she begins to create relationships with. So she's actually in all of these photographs, and yet it would seem as if these are four completely different types of human beings with very different lifestyles. Fascinating to think that she's able to become part of any group by transforming herself in her art. Certainly we can look at issues of body, issues of gender in artwork across many centuries. This particular piece is a relatively recent piece that takes as its basis a painting by Manet, one of the very earliest members of the French Impressionist group, which shows a courtesan and her maid, and in this he has presented himself in the position of the courtesan. So it really is a challenging photograph. It starts to raise questions about gender, race, sexuality, and also because it references the art of the past, it feels almost as if it's sanctioned kind of by the art world. In the first glance, it feels like a piece from 100 years ago, and then immediately it slaps you in the face with what he's actually talking about. There are plenty of artists, particularly photographers. Robert Mapplethorpe comes to mind, as does Catherine Opie, who are artists who really tackle the concept of what masculinity and femininity mean in our culture. Certainly the subject of life and death is a massive one for us in this unit, and one of the things we want to look at is ways in which artists have dealt not just with birth, but with end of life. Gustav Klimt is well known for the painting on the left, The Kiss, but maybe less well known the piece on the right, which shows all of life, birth, mid-age, older age, everybody kind of clinging together, male, female, darker skinned, lighter skinned, but with that specter of death waiting in the edge of the painting there is kind of ominous. There are a lot of images like this, especially in the Baroque era, the 1700s, and this is another vocab term to keep in mind, vanitas. Vanitas comes from the word vanity, and it doesn't mean vanity like you're thinking about your personal appearance and thinking that you look great. Not that kind of vanity. You may be familiar with the expression to do something in vain. When we do something in vain, we do something that we know we're not going to succeed at, but we do anyway. So the idea that in these paintings, the idea that's in vain here is the concept that you're going to be young and live forever as youthful and beautiful and everything's going to be fine. So Vanitas paintings play on this idea of reminding you of the passage of time and reminding you about mortality. But that doesn't mean that they're super grim. In fact, a lot of the things that are in Vanitas paintings are really to remind you about how wonderful life is. Now, at the time this was painted, they didn't know about the dangers of tobacco, but you can see that there's cigarettes, you can see snuff, you can see a rum glass, You can see poetry and novels. A lot of what's in this painting is about the joy of sensual pleasures and enjoyable activities in life. But the skull is there as a reminder, another vocab term for us, a memento mori, memento, reminder, mori, of death, literally reminding you that, yeah, you should enjoy the life that you have, enjoy the pleasures that are available to you, but don't go too far down those roads. Still stay in your lane, stay moral, stay good, because life is short. So it should be enjoyed, but you don't want to overindulge or to sin too. The Vanitas paintings quite often have other symbols in them other than skulls, things like the flowers, insects, in this case even an hourglass, to remind you again of things that are temporary, things that suggest passage of time. The bubbles, for instance, will burst. The flowers, when you first cut them, are beautiful, but they start to die as soon as you cut them from the plant. You can even see in this painting that there are insects there waiting, drawn to the scent of the flowers, but really to eat them, right? To take care of the fact that those things will eventually rot and decay. So the whole concept of Vanitas is really reminding us that life should be enjoyed to the full because it is brief. Certainly, this is a different approach to the concept of death in art. This is the work of a brilliant German expressionist printmaker, Kathy Kollwitz. She was also successful in sculpture and in painting, but she's best known as a printmaker, and she had a very unique relationship in some ways with war. She was not serving in the military herself. Of course, at this time, it would have been almost impossible for a woman to be involved, but her son was killed in the First War, and one of her grandsons was killed in the Second World War. So she had kind of a unique perspective on war as someone who was directly affected by it in their personal life, although she didn't fight in the wars herself. So she presents women clutching babies and being threatened by this kind of specter of death as a very personal way of her dealing or showing or sharing her experiences with other people who could relate to this experience of war and of death. Certainly this image gives you that feeling as well, as if the mother is kind of sacrificing herself so that the child can survive. Definitely you'll see this theme coming up again and again. This is a portrait by photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, and in fact this one directly references the idea of the Vanitas still life. He's got a walking stick that has as the handle a skull, and at the time that he made this photograph he knew that he was dying from HIV/AIDS, and by dressing in black with a stark black background, it really kind of associates his face with the skull. You can see that he's becoming thin and drawn and that he's nearing the end of his life is very much what the self-portrait is about. But it's also brave and conscious, and it directly confronts you. He's looking straight out of the picture at us. He's again reminding us that yes, life is temporary, but that's why you seize it. That's why you try to do the best that you can with what you have as you are living your life, because you don't know at any moment how it might change or potentially end.